Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Hi, welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. My name's Neil Munro. So in today's episode, we're interviewing Robin Bennett, who is the director of Stark Software. Robin and his company put together a report called Damage, which is highlighting the poor condition of asbestos in schools and hospitals and houses. In this episode, we talk about the shocking findings of the report. So let's get into it. Morning, Robin. How are you?
Fine. How's things? All right?
Good. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. So, we wanted to talk about damage, the poor conditions of asbestos in our schools, hospitals and houses. Yeah, we've got a copy.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, not only have you got a copy, I've got them. I've got these here, look. About 400 of them.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Talk us about the background of it, how this came about, where you started with it.
Sure thing. So, you'll be aware of the report that ATAC and NORAC did last year. I think it was launched in November, wasn't it? In Parliament. So I got invited to the launch of that. Really good report about the state of asbestos in 2022 in the UK. And it was the first sort of national report that had been done. Yeah. Fantastic launch. It was in a committee room at the Houses of Parliament. Never been in one of those before. That was fascinating. One of the things that came out of that meeting and that launch of that report was that they couldn't analyse data or hadn't been able to analyse data between different sectors in terms of schools versus hospitals versus domestics versus commercial. And they really wanted to do that because, as you're probably aware, some of the biggest increases in mesothelioma and other asbestos-related disease has been in teachers, nurses, doctors. Yeah. And so this was of particular interest to the committee. The reason it was launched in Parliament, again, you probably know this, but just for people that don't, is because the Select Committee on Work and Pensions, chaired by Sir Stephen Timms, they'd taken a particular interest in this. Yeah. A couple of asbestos campaigns, including the Airtight on Asbestos campaign run by Charles Pickles, had got in touch with the committee and said, the way we're managing asbestos isn't appropriate anymore. There's evidence that says that this isn't the way to do it. They'd done a study, the committee, and come up with some recommendations, and the report was all part of that. So that's why it was in Parliament. That's why it was to do with this select committee. But in particular, when I was at the launch, I said, okay, we might be able to help with this analysis because in Alpha Tracker, we can work out whether it's a hospital, a school, a domestic, whatever. I committed at the meeting to do an analysis from Alpha Tracker data. Yeah. And optimistically, I said we could produce the report in a couple of months, but it's never quite that easy.
No.
And this report is the result of all of that work. Alpha Tracker is an asbestos system used by consultancies in the UK, Australia, New Zealand. We think we've got one of the biggest asbestos databases in the world. Yeah, I think so. I think we're up to sort of 60, 70 million items of asbestos data, something like that. So it is a fair few. So what we did was we contacted 10 of our biggest consultancies, you being one of them.
Yep.
And to their credit, all 10 said that they were willing to share data anonymously for the report. And anonymously is really important to underline. There was no data analysed that was accredited to anybody.
That's good. I didn't know whether everybody would get on board with it or not.
They did. One or two took a little bit of persuading, as you can imagine, because of the worry about client data and GDPR and all the rest. But it was completely anonymised. So once everybody understood that, everybody got on board, which was fab. Then that data was shared. Oh, and so there's about 3 million, just over 3 million asbestos samples in the data that was shared with a professor of stats. Now, I think his formal title is Professor of Risk and Uncertainty at Trinity College Dublin. And he analysed the data, made sure it was consistent, made sure that there were no obvious sort of problems with the data, and then gave us some results, which we've summarised in the report. And like I say, in particular, sorry, go on.
How was the process of collecting that data managed?
It was, so what we did was Alpha Tracker isn't one database, it's a database that each consultancy or client has. So we essentially extracted data in a particular format to suit the work that the professor wanted to do. And like I say, we were able to classify, in particular, because we've not tried to reproduce what the ATAC NORAC report did. This is quite different. In particular, we were looking at damaged asbestos in 4 categories of buildings. So either healthcare, which is hospitals primarily, schools, so education, schools, universities, domestic houses, and then commercial properties. So we split it across the 4. And the damage is why we're interested in damaged asbestos is because there's research now coming out of Europe in particular that if asbestos is in any damaged condition at all, then there's a particularly high risk of asbestos-related disease in schools and hospitals. So it's this link between schools and hospitals and damage that we were trying to explore.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic because the report basically emulates what we as consultants have been about for years. It's what we see day in, day out. It's what our surveyors see when they go to sites regularly, but we never had it on that grand scale of, is it just us? So we're the unlucky ones that are going to all the bad sites, essentially, that they've got damaged asbestos or not. In reality, no, we knew this. So the stats back up what we already knew. So I think it's a fantastic thing to have done.
Yeah, like I say, it took us a lot longer than we thought, but we got there. So 10 big consultancies, you being one of them, data anonymized, summarized, shared with the professor. He gave us the results back. And then we tried to pick out the sort of key facts that were relevant. We did that. We produced the report. We launched it at the Houses of Parliament, which was fun as well. So we went down, I think it was last month, and met 2 MPs. So we met Sir Stephen Timms, who's the chair of that select committee, who's taken a real interest in asbestos. And we also met Jane Hunt, who's the MP for Loughborough. And Loughborough is where Mesothelioma UK are based. So she's taken a particular interest because of the charity there. So we met them. We also met, and if you've seen the photos, perhaps when you put this together for your podcast, you might include a couple of photos. If you've seen the photos that we took in Parliament, there was a guy there on the right, a young guy, I'm guessing in his late 20s, mid-20s, called Richard. He's a volunteer for Mesothelioma UK, but he volunteers for them. He's got interested because his mum, unfortunately, died of mesothelioma at a very young age. She was a GP, but when she'd been doing doctor training in a hospital, there was a removal job that was in progress that went wrong. Fibres were, I think this is the story. I've got this roughly right. I might not have got it exactly right, but there was, I think the enclosure failed, or there was a storm and the enclosure failed. Sure. And she and colleagues had fibres in her lungs from that one incident, I think, or was a very short amount of time. And she died when Richard was very young, and it's really made an impact on him, obviously. So he now helps with the charity. His dad helps with the charity. And I think it's just a reminder again that it's not this sort of industrial disease that people think. It's my neighbour and friend 4 or 5 years ago died of mesothelioma, and he could trace it back to when he worked in an industrial environment where asbestos was around. But now like I say, it's teachers and nurses and doctors. It's different, isn't it? Feels like it's different.
Yeah.
So for Richard, it was a very particularly personal story. So I think it really made an impact on the MPs. They're going to use it in their sort of work, talking to the HSE and things. Airtight and Asbestos are doing that. Mesothelioma UK are doing that. So it's got some traction. I don't do a lot on LinkedIn. You guys, I know, are experts on it, but I don't do a lot on LinkedIn. But the posts that I've done about this, I think we're up to about 20,000 impressions and 300 or 400 reactions or whatever. It's really made an impact on people, I think.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It really is. And the thing for me, some of the highlighted stats, just over 90,000 samples were recorded with high damage, that's a shocking stat on its own. However, when you also take into consideration, you looked at only about 3 million samples, and your database alone, like you say, you've got 70 million. The figure of just under 100,000 from that small pool, how big actually is this problem? And that's what I think it's much further and far wider and reaching than people ever imagined.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
I was just looking at the stats. There was 41.6% which recorded as no damage. So actually, there was more damage recorded than not.
Isn't that extraordinary? I just couldn't believe that.
Yeah, that's the biggest one for me. We're actually saying there's more damage asbestos out there than there is in a good condition.
And we've been managing asbestos for 20 years.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah. Of course, this is only the tip of the iceberg as well, because these are only the properties that have been surveyed.
Yes.
So these are properties where somebody cares enough to actually try and manage and have the surveys done. Andrew Payton from the UK National Asbestos Register, he makes this point all the time. All of the information we've got, which is frightening enough and alarming enough and worrying enough and should be causing action, it's only the tip of the iceberg, because all of the properties where people haven't bothered to have a survey or had the survey done on paper that we haven't got access to the data, who knows what this is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Again, it's the duty to manage has been in place for 20 years now, and we're still carrying out surveys week in, week out, and that building's never been surveyed.
Yeah.
So again, the stats back up what we see as consultants, and it isn't shocking.
So that first finding is really just about the overall condition, position with damage. But then you go on to that second finding, which is hospitals. And that's even more scary, I think. The hospital one, so 20% of ACMs in hospitals and other healthcare settings have got high damage. That's just mad, isn't it? It's just absolutely bonkers. It beggars belief, that one. I actually asked the professor to double check this because it just didn't seem likely, but it is the case. Can you understand why that is? I was trying to rationalize it. Is it just because hospitals aren't in good, as certain parts aren't in good repair, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I think a lot of hospitals have got legacy problems. A lot of hospitals are built in the kind of 50s, 60s where asbestos was heavily used. A lot of them have got underground ducts, pipe work. Most of them are on steam heating, etc. And there's a lot of asbestos, which are probably in areas where normal occupation is in, daily occurrence, which are probably in a bad condition. There's definitely a lot of hospitals that we've been in over the years where, you've got cut off areas underground, which are kind of just left because they can't afford to do anything with them.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of that 20% is probably in those kind of situations.
I think another kind of angle on it as well is that there's a lot going on in hospitals. There's a lot that goes into keeping them running and maintaining them. And I think there is a problem with contractors going in to do work and perhaps not following the procedures in place and checking the reports before they do it. They just go in, deal what they need to deal with and ignore the issue. And then when the asbestos reinspection is carried out, lo and behold, somebody has damaged the asbestos yet again.
Yeah, I bet you're right. I think it's the sort of age of the hospital thing, isn't it? It's as you say, it's that legacy of, it's just too big a problem for anyone to look at. Hospitals are running to just stand still, aren't they, constantly?
Yeah. And it's only going to get worse if we look at the economy and the problems. Budgets being restrained at the minute. I can't see there being a solution to this in the immediate future.
Yeah, it's not bad.
About some heavily investment.
Anybody that's cutting corners already will cut even more corners moving forwards.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Lights on. So
on the domestic side, flipping completely, I think there is hope. I think there's hope on the domestic housing front because of the whole green agenda. People are saying that as houses are greened, their insulation and solar panels and all the things that are going to happen to them, then that will be the opportunity for housing associations and councils to do something about the asbestos that's there, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like a pipe dream, but I never know. Perhaps there is hope there. But with these the infrastructure buildings like the hospitals and the schools, it's hard to know where the impetus is going to come unless there's a change in regulations. And of course, this is what Airtight on asbestos in particular are really pushing for in schools and hospitals, to say that whole thing that we've been saying for years, which is asbestos is safe if you leave it where it is, don't touch it and that's okay. They've got real evidence now, like I mentioned, that isn't true in those two situations in particular. You can't allow it. You just can't leave it in a school. You can't.
Just on the housing one, I think there is quite a lot of investment in for upgrading insulation, etc., domestic properties. However, I think an asbestos removal is being undertaken to enable those works. However, if you actually look at the areas where those works are happening, it's lofts, external, sockets are being taken out, stuff in loft voids being taken out, etc. Lots of properties being externally clad, but they're not really doing anything in the properties. For instance, you may get a kitchen or bathroom replacement, but nothing is ever done in the bedrooms, nothing's ever done in rooms, dining rooms, etc. Where obviously asbestos products will remain and are present. And there's never been any kind of, in my experience, push to clear it. If a property becomes void, let's clear it out. So, yeah, there's stuff being done, but not in that.
No, I
mean, that was my glimmer of hope. I got to give up on that as well. Then I've oh dear.
Exactly. And to add to that, it's like asbestos in schools. And I was part of the asbestos in schools campaign many years ago. And again, equally, schools are special places. They're different to a normal office. To normal office staff, you can say, don't bounce a ball in here, don't damage those tiles. At school, there's incidents where we've been to some schools time and again because the children know if they damage that panel, then they get an afternoon off. So again, it's not a one fits all rule and regulation. It doesn't work. And yeah, like you say, the whole leaving things in situ, but even in a commercial setting, it doesn't work. Time and again, we go to warehouses where, I don't know, forklifts regularly damage asbestos insulating board on columns. The company doesn't have the money to remove it and replace it with appropriate fire insulation materials. So what we've done in the past is, I don't know, overclad, you put metal barriers around these areas. However, accidents still happen, and the forklift drivers have got a very uncanny skill of always finding a way to damage it. So it really doesn't work.
That's fascinating. The third point that we highlighted, this was in schools. More than half of the asbestos that was in our database in schools has already been damaged to a certain extent. Mesothelioma UK they highlighted a tragic case of a teacher, and I think a primary school teacher, and I think primary schools is where the worst of this is, because you tend to get class 3 is the one that's in the prefab in the playground, and the same primary school teacher, often female primary school teachers, that seems to be the theme, has been teaching in that classroom for 15 years. And that's the one with asbestos in that no one's ever done anything about, because the classroom was always supposed to be replaced next year, and never. I remember back in primary school, we were taught in a prefab that was supposed to have been removed. And I happened to drive past my old primary school the other day, and it's still there. Yeah. It's mad. Yeah. So Mesothelioma UK highlighted the case of a primary school teacher who had mesothelioma, and the only time that she'd ever come into contact with it was as a primary school teacher, as you say. And I think, it's just tragic. Like I say, that moves from this is an industrial disease of old people to this is a disease of teachers, nurses, doctors who are in their 40s. It's just a tragic situation. Tragic, and we can't allow it. There's also evidence coming back to schools. I went to a conference last year in Europe, and they were talking specifically about the impact on children of breathing in fibres, and it's worse. They've now got measurements to show it is worse. I suppose
it's fully developed, and it makes it worse.
I suppose it's not rocket science. This is it. It's obvious, but so again, they think that the children are going to start. It seems to be. There seems to be more data around that.
As a parent, looking at those stats, it's shocking. You don't want to send your child to a school with asbestos in it, full stop, let alone 55% of it is going to be damaged. That's really worrying.
Again, more damage than good.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
The fourth finding was out of 5, by the way, is this thing about high damage. So 1 in 9 samples have got significant damage. I think, again, that's just horribly frightening. And then the fifth one, now this was interesting. I don't think I knew this. And this came from airtight on asbestos. So is it right now that people are saying that amosite has got this 100-fold greater risk of mesothelioma? Is that a stat that you've heard as well?
It is a stat we've heard. However, in the regs, all asbestos is still treated the same.
Same, yeah. So I put it in the report, but because it was quoted back to me authoritatively. But
me pointing towards that, because the evidence of the ratio of mesothelioma mortality in this country is one of the highest, if not the highest in the world.
Yeah.
And we were the biggest users of amosite.
Oh, that's okay.
That
backs that up.
That as well.
Yeah.
But it's some crazy stats in there.
Yeah. So this one is saying that 1 in 3 samples with damage
Yeah.
all are amosite or contain amosite. In education, it's 45%. In healthcare, it's 35%. So this, again, is a really worrying stat. This one really made an impact on Charles Pickles, who runs that campaign and was one of the co-founders of a big consultancy. Yeah, and this really impacted on him. And I think he's been looking in particular at all of the evidence from Europe about amosite versus other types of asbestos. It's funny because when I started in asbestos software 20 years ago, there were different types of asbestos were deemed to be more or less risky. And then, as you say, then the regs changed and it was like everything's the same. But I think it looks like it's going to go back the other way, and amosite in particular is going to be
bring back in the action levels and control limits that are at different values. And that does make sense.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
In reality, if we can make them even tighter across the board, that's what needs to happen again.
So yes, those are sort of highlights. In the report then we include the professor's sort of detailed stuff, but quite frankly, I didn't understand that. Never mind. There were lots of really complicated charts and things I thought we had to pay him for.
I'm glad it wasn't.
No, that was a sort of too long, didn't read section at the back. That's for people who've got more time. I've got a maths degree, but I didn't do any stats, so I can't be blamed for that. But yeah, so we're hoping this is going to change the way that people are thinking about schools and hospitals in particular. That's what we've done this for. Someone asked me the other day why we bothered to do this. And I think you've only got to hear, haven't you, a real personal story of either a teacher affected, a nurse affected, a doctor affected. And you realise that this isn't, like I say, the world's changed. It's not the industrial disease that everyone thought it was. And Airtight on asbestos, Mesothelioma UK, the UK National Asbestos Register, they've all got the same aim to try and get the HSE on board to change, to react. Their response, the HSE's response to the report from last year in the select committee, some people thought really wasn't great. It was a little bit, actually, we're okay as we are. And these sorts of stats seem to say we're not okay as we are.
Exactly that. And I think that's what everybody's really pushing for, is the fact that, the stats say it's not okay. I think it does really genuinely need looking at.
That's what Ian said. It's what we've been saying for years.
Yeah.
And it's actually to have the evidence in a booklet. It is really. Are you going to be looking to do anything else with the information, or what's next steps?
There's a few people that have picked it up. So I think the Sunday Times this weekend are running a piece on it.
Okay.
I don't know if that's going to be 2 inches on page 43 or headline news. I haven't got a clue.
Sure.
But they've picked up on it anyway. They did a big piece a couple of months ago on asbestos in general. And I think the same journalist has picked up on this.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to get out there. There's a couple of interviews that we've been asked to do next week about the data. Okay. Of course, I can only speak to the data. So it's great to do this sort of thing because I can say, I've talked to Acorn, big consultancy. They're telling me that this backs up their personal experience. So I can pass that on. And I think that now that the select committee MPs are now back in the loop with this, I'm hoping that perhaps they'll raise it again. We'll see where it goes. I'm going to a couple of conferences this year where I'll be talking about the report again. Hopefully that will raise the profile. There's very little, I feel not powerless, but I can do stuff with our data like I've done. Then I think it's up to the campaigning organisations, so the charities, the Airtight on Asbestos campaign, other people to really push it, I think. We certainly have got engagement, so that's a good start. I'm guessing that TAC and NORAC are going to repeat their exercise this year, next year. I'm guessing it seemed to be like an annual thing they were hoping to do. And the other thing that we've been doing, that open asbestos thing, where we've come up with this protocol so that different systems can share information better. Can be, fine. We've got all the major software providers on board now. So that's great. We've got some housing software companies now who are starting to try it. That's good. And if it does take off, it's still early days. If it does take off, then that means that data will be more easily shareable for people to analyze. So again, it won't just be the Alpha Tracker data or data out of Teams or Shine or Vision or something. It will be all of the industry's data being collated. And then I don't think there'll be the pushback of, well, you're being selective or it's not everything or it's only you picking and choosing. Yeah. The more data, the more systems, the more consultancies are involved, the better, I guess.
100%. Yeah. And the flow of information as well will be a lot easier.
Yeah.
So that is a frustration that we experience, is moving data between clients or between consultancies.
It's hard work.
We experience it together. It's a battle every time.
And it shouldn't be. It's the same data. basically, isn't it? We all store the data in the same way.
Yeah.
Yes. We all record it to a descript method. It should be easily to put some method and that information on.
So, great.
Yeah, so that's where we're going with it. No, it's a pleasure. Good to speak to you.
Keep us posted on how everything develops. We're putting it out there. We're writing articles about it and our own papers and stuff as well to bang the drum. I think it's a fantastic thing to have done. And hopefully,
appreciate your support on this. I've got a few hundred printed copies if you.
Yeah, where can people?
You got any wobbly tables or anything that you want just to prop them up? Just as a little final remark from me, the world's gone mad, right? This is a nicely printed report, I think. It looks really pucker, doesn't it? It looks really pro. It cost me more to post them than to print them.
Madness.
It would have been cheaper for me to drive around the country. When I posted yours, I thought, you're only 50 miles away. I'll just drive it down the road rather than put a stamp on it. Someone's bankrupt for putting a stamp on it. It's crazy. The world's gone mad.
So where can people get copies of this?
Go to our website. We've got a new website, actually, alpha-tracker.co.uk. So there's a new website there about the product. The damage is a link right at the top. So click there. You can read it online, or there's a little contact us thing on there. Fill in your details and you'll get one in the post. You'll just bankrupt me. If we do actually have to post them all and this is it, I'll have to close the business.
The influence.
alpha-tracker.co.uk. Cheers, you too.
We'll put the links in the description. So.
Thanks, appreciate it. See you guys.
Remember, asbestos first, not last.